Hello everyone, and welcome to yet another module of the 6-week Affiliate Mastery Challenge. So today we're going to go over tracking. This is the thing that people have a love-hate relationship with in affiliate marketing. When it's giving you lots of insight and helping you make money, you love it. But when it's not doing what you want to do and you're encountering errors and barriers to getting things set up, you hate it. So what I'm going to do today is talk about exactly what tracking is, why we need it, some of the ins and outs of the different methods that you use to track people. Then we're going to do a little practical exercise, and then we're going to talk about tokens. So tracking is essentially the scary side of affiliate marketing, at least for most people, because many affiliate marketers aren't really that technically orientated, and you don't need to be extremely technical to be a very successful affiliate marketer. Arguably, most of the extremely successful marketers that I know and that most people know, they aren't that tech savvy. They actually outsource really technical stuff to other people and to teams. The thing is, tracking is a definitive, vital part of performance and direct response advertising. Why? Well, if you recall what we went over in, I think, the first module, performance marketing or direct response marketing is kind of characterized by being able to directly track and measure some sort of, tangible or real action that a user has taken or achieved as a result of your advertising, which you can then relate to, how that actually makes you revenue. So we need to actually be able to track user actions, whether they be clicks. So an impression is not really a user action. Clicks, conversions, or behavior on landing pages. We need to know when this stuff is happening, and we want as much insight as possible. Now, with this insight that we get from campaigns, the important takeaway there is that with good tracking, it allows you to make more money. This is essentially it in a nutshell. If you were to distill it down to one important key principle, it's the principle that insight allows you to make more money. So without these insights, we're kind of moving blindly through our campaigns, and we might optimize things based on gut instinct or based on very, very rudimentary tracking, but we don't want to do that. I mean, we're in a digital age where there's so much technology available to us that there's really no excuse for not actually leveraging this data to make far, far more effective, profitable campaigns. Now, practically speaking, tracking typically involves the various entities that are involved in your affiliate marketing processes, storing and passing information about a user's activities between each other. So this might be things like user characteristics or user behavior, such as clicking through on banners and landers and converting on offers and so on, their actual conversion events and timestamps, the revenues associated with that, and various other pieces of data, like from the traffic source, the placement they came from, the mobile device they're on, all of this kind of stuff. Now, you can kind of show a basic tracking process schematically, which you can see on this image here, which is probably floating over the top of me at the moment. So here you go. This is the basic flow. A user visits some page or clicks on an ad and gets to some sort of campaign URL, and then they get sent to your tracker. Now, your tracker, it does several things, but the main key things it does record an actual impression in a visit and then redirect someone somewhere else. They might redirect them directly to the offer, or in this case to a landing page. Users on your landing page, they interact with that and click on some call to action. That takes them back to your tracker. Your tracker records that click and knows who that user is, where they came from, and what to do with them, and then it redirects them onto the offer. Now, at the offer, you can have some sort of conversion event happening, which then gets recorded, and you can see all of this is kind of enclosed in the tracker box here, because that conversion kind of tells, or that conversion gets passed to your tracker. So this is kind of it in a nutshell. Now, let's go back to the tracking schematic that I presented much earlier in the actual course. So recall that there are many entities involved in your campaign. There's your traffic source, there's your tracker, then there's your landing pages and various things you're split testing. Then you go back to your tracker, then you go to an affiliate network, which then redirects to an offer. which is owned by some sort of advertiser. So at any point, there's generally at least 4 different systems that are actually involved here, and they need to communicate somehow, right? So one of the ways they can communicate is server to server, or so-called S2S communication. And this just happens directly between the programmatic systems or the computers that are hosting these systems. But one thing you might notice as well is that the user themselves is persistent across this process. So there's these servers in the background and they're kind of unchanging, but at the same time, a user passing through this flow, they themselves are a static, persistent element of things. So can the user actually be involved in the tracking as well? Yes, they can. Now, the way the user gets involved is with client-side tracking. So there's 2 types of fundamental tracking. There's client-side tracking and there's server-side tracking. Now, with server-side tracking, these servers or these programmatic machine-based systems, they communicate between each other using what are called requests. And these servers track users as they're trying to load various URLs. Now, on the client side, we can have codes and scripts and typically JavaScript actually executed by a user's browser on the actual pages that they're visiting. So with client-side tracking, we would put JavaScript code, for example, or sometimes something like an image pixel or an iframe. In either case, these all are just executing some code on the client side, in the user's browser, or some request of some content which the end server can actually track and can record. Now, in all cases, when we get a script or URL loaded, typically several things happen. This starts a session with the user and creates a cookie in their browser. So if you don't know what cookies are, they're essentially just little text files stored on your computer which store information, and websites can specifically request cookies of certain names and see if you actually have that cookie. That's how you get persistent logins to various sites. It's generally through cookies. And then that cookie just stores information. The key thing that you'll probably store in a cookie for tracking purposes is some sort of transactional ID. Now, here's an example of what a JavaScript tracking code might look like. And this tracking code is just from Facebook. Now, you don't need to understand what any of this means, but one thing you hopefully can notice is at the bottom of that script, there's a no script tag, and inside that is an image element. So generally, when we track with JavaScript, we have to kind of be mindful of the fact that some browsers might have JavaScript disabled. So the no script tag actually only executes if JavaScript is disabled, and in this case, it falls back to an image. And then the user tries to load that image, and the system on the other end, in this case Facebook's sort of image pixel server, actually delivers an image, can track that request, and can do various things when that image actually gets pulled. Now, in all cases, the tracking information here is stored client side, and because of that, there's kind of a bit of unreliability there. If you're relying on cookies on the user's computer, then you're relying on the fact that 1, they store cookies and they honor that. 2, they're not in like a private browser mode where when they exit, cookies are just completely wiped. 3, they don't wipe their cookies, their cache, and their history regularly, and so on and so on. So cookies are great for a lot of things, but for tracking, they are not foolproof. And typically, especially with mobile systems, we kind of try to rely more on server-to-server tracking, because then we're relying on programmatic machine systems that respond instantly and don't rely on a user's computer, and they're just inherently a bit more reliable. Now, let's take an example where someone converts. So say you've been cookied and you're using client-side tracking, and then you go to an offer and you actually convert. So there's 2 things that could happen. First of all, the page at the very end could load a conversion tracking script again, so some sort of JavaScript, and this might search for a cookie of a certain name, and if it finds it, it might find the transactional ID, and then it goes, okay, and it realizes you are this user, and you just converted, and it sends information back to the server. You could also redirect people through some sort of URL, through a tracking system that redirects, and the server itself could ask the user as it's redirecting them whether or not they have some sort of cookie, like using PHP code, for example, and it could do that instead. In either case, the user's browser or a server is actually going into their system in terms of finding a cookie to see whether it actually exists. Now, again, the information is stored client-side, and it relies on the user's browser actually allowing cookies. And in most cases, if you're using like JavaScript, it relies on the user's browser actually processing things in a timely manner. So in situations where the page loads really slowly or there's browser inconsistencies, again, you might actually get things not tracking correctly. And for this reason, yet again, client-side tracking kind of has its pros and cons, and certain industries lean away from it. Now, server-side tracking, on the other hand, is done entirely through servers communicating to each other through requests. So it's basically like trying to load a URL in your browser, but instead of requesting and getting a page back, you just get an answer like, okay, done. So it's not like page delivery, it's a little more like DNS resolution, the way the server-to-server communication works. And it's entirely based on data included in the URLs. So how do we actually pass data in URLs? Well, we use something called query strings. So if you have some URL like lander.php, if you then put a question mark, you can then start putting key value pairs into the actual URL to pass data to another server. And that server can use that information if it is designed and actually wants to do so. So you get these key value pairs, which essentially name equals value, and name equals value, and name equals value, and so on and so on. There's generally no limit to how much you can pass, just kind of depends on the end server. Now, one thing I did want to note is that these query strings, they're kind of like a separate part of the URL. You have, so the URL structure is protocol, like HTTP, // then you have the URI, or the actual URL of the file that you're trying to access, so www.domain.com/landers/lander.php, and then the question mark denotes the start of the query string, which is kind of its own separate part. So to give you a full example, here's a URL with a query string in it, and you have key equals value, key 2 equals value 2, key 3 equals value 3. So some server that you're contacting can get all of these values out. It's kind of like a table of data where you have one column of variable or query string like names, and then one column of values associated with those names. Now, this is relatively easy to test practically and figure out how it works. So what I'm going to do now is just cut to a practical exercise where we look at pulling these query strings out of a URL with PHP. So we'll cut to that now. So hopefully that exercise kind of made things relatively easy to understand. So we can pass information from like our traffic sources and our trackers and so on. We can pass information between these systems, such as click IDs and transaction IDs, in the query strings for the later service to read. Now, every time a user interacts with a traffic source or a tracker, typically they get given a unique ID. And this is kind of one of the most important things that we actually want to pass in these query strings for other systems to store, so that when a conversion happens, we can pass them directly back, so that we can kind of reconcile and communicate what's going on between these systems. So let's give you an example. So say a user clicks on an ad in a DSP. Now, the moment they click that ad, they're loading some tracker URL of yours. And the moment they click as well, they're given some tracking ID or some unique click ID unique to that specific click. And you can append this into your URL and pass it to your tracker. Now, your tracker then records all of this data into a table, and at the same time probably generates its own click ID about this user. So now you have a table of data such as, in this example, fruit equals banana, tracking ID, which is from the traffic source, is add clicker 001, and the tracker click ID is tracked user 001. Now, say the user now clicks through on our lander, we can pass data forward to our affiliate network or to our advertiser as well. Now, to do this, all we need to do is pass the actual click ID from the tracking system, so that when a conversion happens, the affiliate network can tell our tracking system that tracked user 001 actually just converted. But we didn't pass the ID from the traffic source. Why didn't we do that? Well, remember that the tracking system in the center, it has recorded this table of data for that user. So it knows that the user with ID tracked user 001 had tracking ID from the traffic source of add clicker 001, and fruit equals banana. So if our affiliate network passes back some event or some conversion saying, hey, tracked user 001 just converted, it's really trivial for our tracker to be like, okay, I can now tell the traffic source that the associated ID with that conversion was add clicker 001. And so you can do this like relay runners passing battens almost infinitely, and it makes it very, very easy to actually pass conversion data between systems. You don't have to pass all of the data at every single step. You just kind of need that one conversion ID to pass from the end system to the system before it, and then that guy just needs the conversion ID from the system before that, so he can pass on to that, and so on and so on. So you don't need your affiliate network, for example, to fire conversion events for your tracker and your traffic source. That's actually not the way you tend to do things at all. So hopefully that's relatively easy to understand. Now, this passing of information between servers happens using something called a postback URL, and it is quite literally for posting information back. So you have some URL that server at the end loads from another server, like the affiliate network server loads the URL that's owned and hosted on the tracking system. The tracking system just responds by going, yep, I got that response, and then it just records receiving that request, and it might associate that with something actually converting, and then it might go on and do another action, contact another server, and so on and so on. Now, the main difficulty in figuring out how to exactly and coherently pass this information consistently from one system to another system to another system is that it's all dynamic, right? It all varies per user, and you need some way of actually changing the information passed per user. So we store all of these key value pairs in some sort of table of data, right? And we want to pull that data out and dynamically pass it into URLs. So when we have someone at the traffic source and they click on our ad, we want to pass a unique ID for them. We might want to pass stuff like the placement ID they came from. Then when we get to the tracker and we have all this data stored, we might want to then pass like a banner ID to the network as well for some reason. We obviously want to pass click ID. We might want to pass country or something like that. The question is, how do we dynamically inject these values into our actual URLs? Now, it's actually very simple. We use something called tokens. They are sometimes called macros. And what these are just pieces of text in a system which are treated as something dynamic. So generally this is a word wrapped in some sort of encapsulating things that denote that it is a token. So some systems use squiggly brackets around it. Some systems use double squiggly brackets. Some use double square brackets. Some use percentage marks. Some use dollar signs, so on and so on. Essentially, you might have something like click ID that has then got brackets around it of some sort, and that tells the system that you're working with that, hey, this is something dynamic that you should actually replace when this URL gets loaded. Now, this sounds simple, but the problem is that these tokens are generally unique to every single system that you work with, and so you need to know exactly which tokens and what format they are in you should use for every single system, and you need to get them exactly right to the letter. So to give you some examples, system A might have tokens such as variable 1, variable 2, click ID, and squiggly brackets, and then system B might have stuff like $underscore var1 for variable 1 underscore $. So obviously it's quite clear what denotes it as a token. It's the things on the left and right hand side that kind of encapsulate it, but these are clearly very, very different tokens. So you can't get away with just using tokens that are familiar to you. You always have to make sure that you know exactly what the token format is for any system you work with. If you join a new traffic source, you join a new network or an ad network, for example, make sure you look it up in their support documentation or you ask a representative. Don't just assume it's going to be this or that, because you don't know. Unless you've worked with that system before or you have someone else tell you what it is, do not just guess. However, once you do know these tokens, it's pretty easy to actually just pass this data in your URLs. For example, having your add URL have those tokens in them, like and this equals that, and this equals something else, and so on and so on. It's pretty easy to actually put these tokens in there and pass data through to our tracker. So to give you a live example, if you had some traffic source and you use tokens like this, the traffic source goes through and processes that URL when a user actually clicks. So these are dynamic, so be aware that this is the URL you use in your ad, and this URL is actually changed to the processed URL every time an ad impression is actually served. So the user goes to actually, the user sort of requests some sort of ad, or they load a page and there's an impression being served to them. In the background, you have all this real-time building, all of this stuff happening, and the DSP, or GoToMobi, for example, pushes this ad through, and you know the DSP will have an idea of, or get data on, the parameters about that user it's bidding on. It kind of has to know whether or not it wants to even bid on that user. And as a result, the URL gets changed as it gets pushed into the auction, and then the end user only sees the final result, which in this case would look something like this. Now, when you pass this through to your tracking system, you would store all of this data in some sort of table. So you might have it like this, where it's a key name value table with C1 to C5 and some external parameter. Now, if the traffic source had this, as listed here, as their postback conversion tracking URL, which was listed in their support documentation, or as you're making a campaign, this is what they gave you. What they're saying is they want you to pass back this value, which is generated by their token called TransID. So whatever that token generates, in this case it was QWERTY12345, when that person converts, or the user associated with that ID converts, that is the value that you need to pass back to the system. So now if we go to our tracker, the URL that we want our tracker to actually request to say, hey, a conversion happened, would be blah, 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 trafficsource.com, conversion equals QWERTY12345. Now, the thing here is we need our tracker to now put that value in dynamically, and to do that, we need to put in this external parameter. So we passed various values as C1 to C3, C4, C5, as well as external. So we need to pass external back. We can't use bracket, bracket, trans ID, bracket, bracket, because that's not the token for this tracking system. That's what gave us that value from the traffic source, but that's not the token of the specific system. Now, in this case, it just so happens that the token for external is just external inside square brackets, and so that is what we would actually put in the postback URL that we configure in our tracking system. Now, all you really need to remember from this is that if you are configuring something in platform X, so you're logged in on the traffic source and changing something, you use the token specific to that traffic source, nothing else. If you're in the tracking system, you use tokens specific to the tracking system, nothing else. If you're at the affiliate network configuring a postback URL there, you use tokens specific to the affiliate network system, nothing else. So essentially, you don't ever use language A in platform B. So don't speak Greek to a platform that's expecting French, for example. Affiliate networks are exactly the same as tracking systems in the way that they have query strings for passing variables and then various tokens, and they will all have their own query string structure as well. So besides having different tokens, they will have a different way that they expect you to pass data. So we can't use any query string format that we want. If a system is looking, a system won't just log all query string data and then figure it out from there. So we can't just say question mark, variable 1 equals this, and variable 2 equals that, variable 3 equals this to an affiliate network. No, we have to use the specific structure that they actually provide and that their programmatic system is actually looking for. If we don't do that, then the data just won't get passed. So remember, they're programmatic systems. They only work with what they are programmed to work with. Now, when we get to actually setting things up on a DSP, I will, of course, go through all of this from start to finish so that I can show you how we would actually set up the URLs and the tracking system and the tokens and postbacks and everything from start to finish. So hopefully that will clarify things a little bit, and we're going to set up a tracker shortly and do various tests there, so everything should kind of demystify a little bit. Now, to finish up, just remember this. you don't learn a tracking system, you learn tracking. And this is 100% true. If you know how the basics of tokens work, you know how postbacks work, you understand server-to-server tracking and URLs and redirects and things, it doesn't matter what tracking system you use, you can figure it all out. So there is no tracking system that I have ever used that I haven't found easy and, well, not intuitive. That kind of depends on the user interface and things, but there's no tracking systems I've ever encountered where I don't know what I'm doing without having to look at their support documents. The only thing I would really look at for there is stuff like postback URLs and conversion tracking URLs where they might actually only be there. But in general, if you understand the fundamentals of tracking, then you won't go wrong anywhere. Okay, that's it for today's for this module. We will talk about setting up a tracker in a moment. This is Zeno, signing out.